Over at Hop Take, my weekly column about the beer industry, I write a fair amount about the vessels beer comes in, packaging, as the industry calls it. But we don't talk too much about beer's various packages here, Taplines listener, and for good reason. It's pretty boring material for oral history. Long necks, stovepipes, pony kegs, these are fun things to say, but not so much to discuss at length, you know? Which is why we've made it 34 whole episodes without dedicating a single one to an examination of a specific beer container. But this, listener, this is episode 35. And it's time to go where no Vine Pair podcast about modern beer history has gone before. In the mid-70s, as the light beer wars were starting to heat up, a family-run brewery in western New York called FX Matt, one of the nation's oldest and still running to this very day, came up with a wild new packaging format for its beer. It was bold. It was bizarre. It was balls. Big, translucent plastic spheres full of 5.16 gallons of Matt's premium lager. Part keg party, part party trick, FX Matt's beer balls were all the rage in the 80s and soon drew competition from local rivals and national heavyweights alike. Joining Tapline today to talk about beer balls and so much more is fourth generation Matt and president of the brewery that bears his family's name, Fred Matt himself. Stick around, listener, because this one's about to get rolling. Oof, ball jokes. Sorry about that. It's FX Matt, President Fred Matt. It's Matt's Premium Lager. It's the rise and fall of the beer ball. And it's all right here, right now, on Vine Pair's Taplines. You know, listener, these days, everyone's talking about spheres. Out in Las Vegas, they got a big sphere that everyone's all buzzing about. It's like a big IMAX theater. It's a concert venue. It's something. But we're not talking about the Vegas sphere today. In fact, we're not even talking about spheres per se. We're talking about balls, beer balls. And to roll us down memory lane, we tapped the one and only Fred Matt of FX Matt Brewing to join us today to talk about the rise and fall, and maybe someday rise again. We don't know, of the beer ball, this vessel that really, I think, defined a moment in sort of the second half of the 20th century. Right as the 20th century was coming to a close, this bizarre vessel that people loved, and it all started in upstate New York at the brewery called FX Matt. Fred, thank you so much for joining us today on Taplines.
Psyched to be here. These are fun.
We're talking beer balls, man. So before we get into how this sort of inimitable package came to be, because it was really unusual in the beer business at the time. We haven't really seen too much like it since. Let's talk a little bit about FX Matt for listeners who may not be familiar with that name. They're certainly familiar with other names that FX Matt puts out into the marketplace. Tell listeners who might not be apprised what FX Matt is all about.
Yeah, so FX Matt was my great-grandfather, my father also. So my great-grandfather emigrated from Germany, a little town called Eagle-Schlott, which is in the Black Forest in 1878. Came to upstate New York because it reminded him of the Black Forest, and really left Germany because with the caste system, so to speak, his family was a farming, laboring family, and he was going to be destined to be that, and he wanted more. So came to Utica, did a leveraged buyout of the brewery, and so we made basically craft beer from 1888 to Prohibition. During Prohibition, we made a line of beers called, soft drinks called Utica Club, and Near Beer, which we put on the side of the can, do not add yeast or you create alcohol. So we basically told you what to do. And then coming out of Prohibition, Utica Club brand had done so well that we did the Utica Club brand Utica Club exploded, and we had Jonathan Winters, the famous comedian, did all our Talking Steins. And then we came out with a product called Matt's Premium in the 60s, which really did exceedingly well as well. Then the 70s, the beer ball. The 80s became kind of tough for regional breweries. And my father got us into contract production. So some of the cool things is almost anybody on the East Coast in craft has either worked with us or does work with us.
Or will work with you.
Yeah, or will. We started with New Amsterdam, Matthew Riesch. We did Dock Street, Old Hyrick, Sam Adams until Jim bought his breweries. Blue Moon started here as a brand.
That's right.
So the Spike Seltzers categories, it today, started here. Our big brands today are Saranac Beer, Saranac Soft Drinks, Utica Club, which I always say has become so bogus it's hip. We do Kingfisher, Mackenzie Cider, product called Right Coast, which is a spirit. And then we have a whole line of contract production. So today, about 50% of our business is our contract partners and 50% is our own brands. I think what makes us really unique in that space is that, because we launch brands all the time and we work with distributors, retailers, consumers, we know what it's like to, have a product out in the market. And so I think we're more sensitive with our customers when they have a problem in that they need beer quickly or they need their product quickly. We turn on a dime for them because, empty shelves are empty shelves and no one likes them. But since we know what it's like to have an empty shelf, we don't like anybody else to have an empty shelf. So today we're in, beer, distilled spirits, wine in cans, non-alcoholic seltzers. So we really do the gamut. Anything but dairy we're doing, and diversification has been very good for us because, in the old days where you're just beer, life can get a little tough. And, even right now, you see beer.
Sure.
I think beer will come back, but I think, in the craft category, we've put too many different brands out there without any innovation. And the dilemma with that is the consumer gets confused because there's too many things out there.
Yeah, a glut of SKUs. I mean, in the craft beer industry for the last 7, 8, 9 years, there's been talk of, SKU-mageddon, right? Like, is there just too much going on in this space? I think in more recent years, we've seen that borne out. And I think the answer, I don't know that anyone would really argue the case that, there isn't, too much chaos going on in the market. I think, you see smart breweries kind of getting a little bit more narrow, getting a little bit more dialed in on their product. Yeah, your point is well taken, Fred. One of the things I think it's worth noting about FX Matt, or really just emphasizing about FX Matt for listeners who don't know, is like, this is an aged institution of the American brewing landscape. And as Fred noted, and thank you for the backstory there, it's both producing its own brands and contract brewing. It's not completely unusual to see something like that, but at the scale that FX Matt does it, it's in kind of a league of its own. It fills a very unique spot in the marketplace. So I think that's worth listeners just kind of keeping in the back of your head as we talk about the product innovations that FX Matt pursued, and specifically the product innovation of the beer ball, because I really do think that it's sort of kind of peerless in this space in terms of its size, the volume you guys do, and sort of the 1 foot in, owned and operated, the 1 foot in contract. So,
the thing I build on that is that we have been around 135 years. I'm fourth generation to run the company, and we're a family.
Yeah.
And what I think is cool is that probably 135 years in a family that still gets along, the success rate's about 1%. So that's pretty cool.
Good for you guys. All right, Fred, as is tradition here on Taplines, this is a history podcast, so we got to do a little time travel. We got the Taplines time machine, and I like to ask the guests to set the date that we scroll back to. We're talking beer balls. Where does the beer ball story begin? Approximately what year? When does this thing come to be?
About 1975.
Okay.
My uncle Kemper Matt, who was head of sales, vice president of sales, saw a plastic sphere that was built by or made by Johnson Enterprises. And he said, that'd be a pretty cool, package for beer. And so he came back. Actually, Utica Club was the first beer ball. And then we switched to Matt's Premium pretty quickly. But 1975, I'd say maybe 74, he came up with the idea, and it was a fantastic idea, which I like to say that we sold 10 million beer balls before, Genesee, Coors, Bud, anybody even noticed it.
They jumped on it.
And,
yeah.
And they did jump on it late, but they jumped on it.
What was the beer ball? Like the initial beer ball, Fred, for listeners who are too young to remember this from, when it was in the marketplace, or maybe aren't close to Google and can't quickly Google it to take a look at this thing. Can you describe what this vessel actually was?
Yep. So a beer ball was a really cool package. It was a round sphere. It was 5 and 6 gallons, which was basically 55 12-ounce glasses of beer. And it came in a square box, which was covered. What you do is you'd open the box, pour glass around the sphere, close the box, and then you had a pump.
Ice around the sphere.
Put ice around it. Yeah. And then put this pump in that you bought for $7 or $8 that you could keep using. And then you just pumped it, and you could take it any place. It could be at college campuses, it could be on terraces, it could be beaches, in your car. Drinking and driving was not necessarily legal, but everybody did it.
It was much more prominent. Yeah.
Oh yeah, if you got pulled over by a policeman, then they'd either have someone else drive, they'd follow you home, or just say keep going.
Wow.
Different
era.
Yeah, and so one of the things I always like to tell the change in times is that in 1978, one of our summer jobs, myself, 2 of my brothers, and some neighborhood kids, was we did the beer ball line. And we'd take a beer ball home at night. We'd be out on the terrace, so we'd drink the beer ball. Mind you, it's 55 glasses, so you might have...
It's a solid serving there, Fred.
You might have 6 or 7 guys, 8 guys drink it. And we'd finish the beer ball. We'd get my dad's car keys, and we'd be going out to the bars. It's now, call it 9 o'clock at night. And my dad would say, hey, don't you guys want some roadies? And so we'd go down to the cellar and get a 12-pack of beer and come back up, grab his keys, and get in the car and drive.
God, man. A different era, no kidding. And I guess there, you had a different young drinking career than I think many. When you come from a storied brewing family like the Matt family, I suppose maybe that's a little bit different of an experience than certainly than I had, and I bet a lot of our listeners had. Okay, so the beer ball comes around 1974, 1975. Your uncle Kemper Matt. What is Johnson Industries? What is it, like a fabricator in the area?
They made these plastic spheres, and they had another business. I can't remember what it was, but that was a pretty big business for them. They were in the plastics, and ultimately beer balls got so big for us that we bought basically a sphere blowing machine. And so you got you literally got like a test tube, plastic test tube. You'd put it in the thing and blow up the beer ball, roll off, and then we'd fill it.
So do you have any idea what that original one was used for? Was it just like for some sort of project, or it had nothing to do with the beer industry, in other words?
No.
Yeah. He laid eyes on it. I honestly
don't know. I'll have to ask my Uncle Kemper. Is that they might have actually designed it for us, because it had, I think we bought a mold, and they were a plastics company, and he basically had them make the mold and make it for us, because it was a real thick plastic originally. It was a white opaque beer ball.
So it had to be, right? Otherwise, it would crack in the box,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
you got a mess here. Okay, so the beer ball comes around 1975 or so. You sold you mentioned just a moment ago, you feel like you sold maybe 10 million of them before all the other brewers finally caught on that this thing was a trend. Let's talk a little bit about the reception in the marketplace, though. I mean, this is what are the dominant packages at this point? Were 40s around at this point, or not so much yet?
Not so much yet. It's basically a lot of what I call non-tippers. Stubby bottle.
I like that. I've never heard that term before.
Yes, they're earthquake-proof, as we used to say. So you had those. You didn't have a lot of cans. And these beer balls would go right in the wells of the cooler, or, some put them in the back of the cooler, but they'd go in the wells of the cooler. So they were very shoppable. And you just had to keep them in the cooler and then ice them. So there was, kegs were a lot bigger then. And so that, instead of getting a keg, which had to be pre-ordered, it was a pain in the ass.
You got to be strong to move it around. Yeah.
And you got a beer ball you could grab and go. And the other thing I always say when people say, how come they don't come back, is that, when you go to a party today, there's import, there's craft, there's mainstream light, there's, you'll have teas, you'll have everything.
Wine-based fruit punch. Yeah, right. The whole gamut. Yeah, sure.
And in those days, you went to a party, you had one beer.
Right.
And that was all you had.
Right.
So
55 glasses of Utica Club is what you get at a party. And if you don't like that, well, there's 55 glasses of Matt Premium.
Right, exactly. That was it.
Yeah.
So, and people weren't as picky about it. I mean, it was like beer was beer, and everybody loved beer. So you didn't deal with everybody saying, I don't like beer. I never even heard people say they didn't like beer.
Yeah. They weren't coming to, they knew better than to come to parties at the Matt house. That would be poor, or at least not to say something like that in front of the Matt family. Okay, so the beer ball, it hits the scene. As you mentioned, it's shoppable. There's not a whole lot, because mini kegs, like ponies, stuff like that, was not available yet, right?
No.
So you basically, the American drinking public, if they're going to the grocery store, they can get a 6-pack, a 12-pack. Were people doing 30 racks back? Not really, because cans were
20,
not.
24, 6, 12.
Sure.
Cans weren't, bottles were probably 70, 80% of the volume.
Yeah, most of the market. Because the Coors Brewing Company was innovating around aluminum cans at this time. But was this still, and I don't mean to, I hope this isn't ageist, Fred. I'm not trying to pick on you. Were people still popping the can with a can key? Or had the pop tab been rolled out yet? Like, when did that come around?
I don't know. I certainly saw, the can opener ones, but I'm pretty sure all my life was the
pop tab.
The pop tab.
Yeah. But the point I was trying to make is that the volume that is available to the American drinker at the grocery store without going through the extra hurdles of of ordering a keg, is pretty limited unless you've got something like a beer ball product. So it's filling a niche in the market that, especially at the time, in the late 70s, 80s, as you described, people just wanted to drink one specific kind of beer. They their eyes hadn't been open to the broad flavor array that the craft brewing industry would eventually introduce to the American palate. And so 55 glasses of beer, this is a good deal. I can put ice right in the thing. This is a no-brainer. How did it sell? So
one thing I just add on the beer ball,
Please.
In today's world, it was disruptive.
Yeah.
I mean, it just became, if you went to a party, you brought a beer ball. You didn't bring cases of beer. You just bought a beer ball. And in today's world, if you think about it, from a sustainability standpoint, it was a lot better.
Sure.
The thing literally exploded immediately. It was...
Well, not literally. These balls were not exploding, listener.
No. But my Uncle Kemper tells a story of going to see a chain and, having a beer ball and having it in front of his knees in the guy's desk. And the guy kept on looking over the desk and, what is this thing?
Yeah.
And he finally put it up, tapped it, and gave the guy a beer. and it was like, just put it in the store.
Back
so
the truck up. Yeah.
And it was a thing that, it just, when you get a product, and we've had them, a lot of other of our competitors have had it, when you get a product that, delights the customer and wows them, it just, boom. And, for all of us in marketing and sales, the objective is delight your customer, give them something that they really want that fills a need, and you'll do well.
Yep. And it really did fill a need because, again, listener, you got to remember, kegs were bigger and burlier then. They were heavier, and the beer ball weighed, what, like a third as much, Fred? What do you think?
Yeah, so it probably weighed 30 pounds.
Yeah, so very portable, very able to move around. Hey, the tap, was that like it was not a proper tap like you would tap a keg with, was it? Or was it?
No, it was a 2-pronged tap. There was a short thing and then a long thing, and then there was a pump on top of it.
Gotcha.
And it was great because, once you bought the tap, it's like having a razor blade or razor blade handle. You just keep buying the razor.
Yeah.
We just kept selling the beer balls, and you could buy a tap if you needed. Some of us that didn't want to spend the $7, just get a screwdriver, pop the top, put the thing and pop the top, and then you'd either drink it that way or you'd cut a hole and have like a punch bowl and just scoop the beers out.
Oh man, like a scorpion bowl full of
exactly.
Utica Club. Yeah, no, or like the eggnog pitcher in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation that he dips into. Yeah. That's an innovation. No, your point about disruption, I think, is like well made also, Fred, because like there's this idea, or like, you hear a lot of in the beverage alcohol industry today, you hear a lot about like, white space innovation. Like we need to like figure out where, no one's going, right? And it's like, and then go develop a product to fit like a niche that, doesn't even exist yet. And I think, there's some merit to that. There's some some examples of that having success, but I like the idea that like disruption doesn't always have to, kind of be that big new reinvent the wheel type of thing. It's more like, well, people like the beer. People need, like there's a real need that we're filling here. What if we just put it in this globe and called it a day? No, you're right on there. So
just do it better.
Yeah, right. Just do it better. Exactly. So it starts selling like hotcakes. The beer's flying off the shelves. Around when, in your recollection, does the rest of the beer industry catch wise?
I'd say probably around 1986, maybe 87.
Mid-80s or so.
Yeah, which is really interesting because, when you do a product today that catches fire, you'll have competitors in three months, 6 months.
Sure.
We came out with Saranac Trail Mix. I don't think we had a competitor for like 3 years.
Wow.
And if you did, that was the first mix pack in the as far as beer, that was the first mix pack ever.
Yeah.
And that thing, was like wildfire. We didn't have a competitor.
Yeah.
And I remember Costco in Pentagon City did 6,000 cases a year just out of that one store.
Whoa.
I mean, it was unbelievable. But it's, today you do something that's cool, you're going to have so many competitors on your back in a heartbeat.
Sure. And obviously, like, part of that is just the nature of a more crowded space.
Right.
More crowded beer industry than it was even, 20 years ago, let alone 40. But at the time that we're talking about when the beer ball came along in the mid 70s, and then when the rest of the competition finally kind of rolled out their own clones of it or their own knockoffs of it in the mid 80s. These were not, as you mentioned earlier, these were not the salad days certainly not for American beer. I suppose imports had a bit of their day in the sun in the 80s, but like, what was going on in the broader beer industry during this era, Fred? And especially not just in general, but also at FX Matt. Tell us a little bit about how the beer ball, sort of arrives and what its milieu is.
Yeah, so the beer ball, was a welcome sales item at the time.
Yeah.
I would say that the the late 70s, 80s were very rough for the regional breweries. And America got down to something like, I think it was maybe 40 breweries left in the country.
Whoa.
And, we in Yangling were there, but, all of us weren't doing so well. And really what turned the dial for all of us that have been successful, again, in the beer business is really craft beer. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I always said, in those time periods, the game got to who could get to water first and call it beer. And that's somewhat disparaging, but it's not really disparaging in that that's what the customer wanted. The customer wanted lighter, lighter, lighter.
Yep.
And light beer became close to 50% of the market. All the national companies were doing was putting a product out there that their customer base wanted. And quite frankly, they did a great job. I mean, to a beer that is that thin, that consistent quality. You may not like light beers, but, for them, they are awesome brewers.
Sure.
And anybody that doesn't think those guys are good brewers doesn't know what they're talking about. We should worry when they want to come into a category. And when they do, it's not fun to play with them. Mm-hmm. But I think, the pendulum went so far on no taste that it created an opportunity for taste. And that's where craft came in. And craft, over the time really came and took, we're about 12 or 13% of the market now. But, during that building period, if you think about it, we had, the explosion of craft really in kind of the late 80s and, really the 90s. But then in 97, that the Sam Adams Dateline NBC where they
infamous.
Yeah. And, I always said that was a major company in the country that spent a lot of money on the networks that got them to do that expose. And I would say it was like, you saw your business going like 100% growth, and the next day it dropped to like 10.
Whoa.
I mean, it was ridiculous.
Just a brick wall. Listener, just to clarify, Fred is referring to Anheuser-Busch. There was and I said infamous. The reason I said that is it really was, there was a really damning Dateline episode that scrutinized Boston Beer Company's claims of being sort of a craft product by highlighting the fact that Jim Cook, the co-founder of Boston Beer Company, was contract brewing, which contract brewing, not a bad word in 2023. The American consumer is much more educated about beer than even 10 years ago and certainly, 30 years ago. It seemed like this big, like scandalous reveal, right, Fred? This was a big deal for the whole industry.
It was like you were hoodwinking the customer.
Right.
And that did not go over well. And there was a massive shakeout really kind of and there was, probably too many of us out there. There was a shakeout really kind of from 98 to, say, early 2000s. Kind of 2002, I think, is when beer craft started to take off again.
Coming back around. But it was flat or down. Yeah.
And it's been explosive pretty much since then. There was a little bit of a shakeout, I'd say, in kind of 2011-ish. But, now I think you're definitely seeing some tough sledding for a lot of our craft brethren. And, I would say it's not as fun in the craft category right now. The craft category will remain. It's, it's flavorful. People like it. It's just, I think we've gotten to a point where there's just too many choices. And, it happens to me. I go into a situation and I get kind of, cough cold. I go into the drugstore and you're trying to buy something because you got a cough cold. And half the time I walk out, if I can't get the pharmacist, I walk out because I'm so confused on what I ought to buy.
Yeah, and that that effect happens in the beer aisle just like anything else, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Point well taken. Fred, so we talked about in the mid-'80s, I wanted to go back. You sort of like framed up how craft was a key boon for the beer industry. Prior to that, you mentioned the light beer, boom, which is happening, if my memory serves correctly, right around the same time as the beer ball appears in the mid 70s. Yep. Listener, go back and check out our episodes with Maureen Ogle, the historian and the author of Ambitious Brew. We talk about the light beer wars. Miller Brewing Company gets a bunch of money from Philip Morris and rolls out the original light beer from Miller. And then eventually Anheuser-Busch and Coors Light are forced to respond. And that's a whole other story. Go check out those episodes. The beer ball arrives during that era. And then in the mid-'80s is when the other big, the big macros take a break from slugging it out with each other for shelf space and picking over Schlitz's bones and say, hey, look at this beer ball thing. Look at what FX Matt's doing. Maybe we should do one of those. Tell us a little bit about, recall, if you will, for us, when you guys first started noticing competitors move into the space and how, what you're thinking about internally. What, do we have to respond? How do we, hey, this is our thing. Hey, tell us a little bit about that.
So I wasn't at the brewery in that time, but I would say it was tough sledding, and it was tough sledding for a couple reasons. Is that breweries like ours were making really great quality beer. When you brought in Philip Morris, which owned Miller, and brought marketing to the game, and they woke up Bud, and Bud became a marketing company. You now have this wonderful marketing coming from these beer companies that had been more production-oriented. We were production-oriented. And so they just an onslaught of great advertising, and we couldn't keep up. And so our way of keeping up was they'd take a price increase and we'd hold price. And the 80s really became known for price and quality. So as you dropped your price, we weren't necessarily cutting any quality of ingredients, but we were cutting our price. So the perception is, well, that can't be as good because this beer is better.
So it backfires in a way. Yeah.
So I would tell you, we went into a death spiral, and so yes, you had Bud's, you had Coors Party Ball, Bud. I can't remember what it was. You had Genesee. Genesee had the same problems we had, and essentially our beer ball, which was the number one player, got crushed because you now had Coors and Bud. So add image to a brand that's kind of cutting its price back and becoming kind of I'd say regional nicely, but it was almost like no man's land on price. And people went to the brands that were heavily advertised. And so, that just started to decline. And what really hurt the beer balls for everybody ultimately was the cost of goods for the beer ball just became too high. So
interesting.
Where you were, a beer ball in its heyday, you could buy it for $13.99 to kind of $14.99. But, when it got over $19.99 and was in the low 20s, people would say, well, hell, I'll just buy a case of beer. And then if I don't use it, or 2 cases of beer, if I don't use it, I still have the cases of beer versus I've tapped a keg or a beer ball, and now I can't use it. And so when people always ask me, well, when's the beer ball coming back? There's 2 things. One is it's not really cost effective anymore. And the second thing is that who's going to buy, 2 cases of beer and have a party that they're going to go through 2 cases of one product in a night is probably unlikely. And so I don't think there's a beer ball market. I will tell you, our biggest posts are beer balls. The question I get asked the most is beer balls. And we did a great spoof on when they shot down the weather thing, the weather balloon of the Chinese. We did a beer ball, floating over the brewery, and that got a tremendous number of posts. But I think that, it was a great package, a great product for its time. I think I'd be surprised if it comes back again.
Yeah. What did distributors think about it at the time? What was obviously they like it because it's a hot product, but like, did they have to adjust the way they were handling and storing this stuff? Like,
that was the great thing because it was a square box. So
you could just stack the boxes.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, you see a guy rolling in cases into a convenience store or to a grocery store, more often a convenience store because they got to go in the front, or a bar or restaurant. They fit perfectly. I think you could get 4 or 5 of them on one of those, little case trucks.
Yep.
And they were easy to stock in the shelves. They were easy to roll in. And so everybody liked it.
Yeah, yeah. So Coors, Anheuser-Busch, I think you mentioned Genesee. I had gone back and researched for this episode and watched some of the old Coors beer ball commercials. Listener, you can go check those out on YouTube if you go search for them. And it's a great tagline. I think it's like something along the lines of like, you can't have a party if you don't have a ball, something along that, which is great, right? Like this is, you get it. I understand why that does well, but that sucks for FX Matt that doesn't have the, the dough to go pay someone, an ad agency in Chicago or in New York to do a bunch of jingles, to do a bunch of, copywriting. Did you guys try to compete on ads at all? Do you remember?
Yeah. So, when I was, my dad did commercials from kind of 1979 to maybe 82 or 3, maybe not that long, but, they were kind of Lee Iacocca-like, so Chrysler cars.
Sure.
At the time, Chrysler was one of the big 3, number 3, and hit bankruptcy, and they brought in Lee Iacocca, who had been running Ford. And Lee Iacocca did these great ads that, if you don't like my car, basically you can come bring it back, and I'll put a 5-year guarantee on it and all that. And so my dad just did these commercials that were, all around the brewery and the beers we make, etc. He became kind of a mini celebrity. I mean, you'd go with him, and people would be like looking at him, and they, "Are you FX?"
They recognize him.
Yeah. Or you'd go to a Syracuse Chiefs game in those days, and he'd be sitting behind home plate, and you'd have a line all the way up to the top mezzanine, and all he'd be doing is signing things the whole time. Which
that's pretty great.
I don't. He was very gracious and did it well. I don't ever think he liked it that much.
Yeah,
but,
he's just trying to watch a ball game.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, the curse of beer ball celebrity, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
But back to my question, like so FX Matt was advertising the beer ball product.
Yes, we did have a beer ball ad. I know I've seen it. I just can't really remember it.
Yeah, because I tried to dig it up. I figured that it would exist, but I couldn't find one. But how widely was this available at its height, Fred?
I know we shipped them to California. The Cape was huge.
It all the way, huh? Yeah.
Florida was huge. So really, any water areas were big.
I bet.
And then college campuses were big.
Yeah.
And then just normal markets.
Yeah. Gotcha. So. When does it end? When did FX Matt stop producing beer balls?
Well, for us, so I came back here in 1989, and we stopped making beer balls probably about a year or 2 after that.
Yeah.
And it just got where, they weren't selling that well, and the stores were taking them out of the main cooler and putting them in their back coolers, and it wasn't as accessible, and people weren't drinking, one beer as much, and so it just was time to go.
Because at that point, in the late 80s, early 90s, at this point, you start to see some glimmers of the craft brewing industry, right? You're starting to see the Sierra Nevadas, the Samuel Adams of the world start make some inroads. You're also still at this point, if I'm not mistaken, sort of in the green bottle foil label import moment, when Heineken is red hot. We talked to Philip Van Munching, listener. You go check out those episodes with the son of Leo Van Munching, who is the sort of iconic importer of Heineken here in the United States. So imports had this big moment too. So people were still buying beer, right, Fred? But it wasn't necessarily a regional brand like a Utica Club. It wasn't necessarily, at volume like the Beer Ball offered. So it was just kind of out, at that point, it sounds like maybe a little out of step with what the consumer was looking for at that point.
Yeah, you had much more. The premiumization was starting. You bring up imports.
Yeah.
Heineken was big. Beck's was big. Where we live in upstate New York, really from Albany to Michigan, the Canadian breweries just crushed it. And
Labatt's, Molson.
In those days, it was Molson. Mostly Molson and then Labatt's.
Yep.
But, the Budweiser, which got pretty close to 50 share, and I would say from Albany to Buffalo, I don't think they ever cracked 30 share.
Wow.
Because the Canadians were so strong, and the Canadian beers outsold, Bud is the number one beer. But, an interesting thing, when we launched Saranac, we bought Beck's bottles from New York City, used Beck's bottles. We cleaned them and then relabeled them, put Saranac in them, relabeled them, and shipped them. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Was that even, I don't mean to impugn your practices. Was that even legal? Were you even able to do that?
So think about it. Those days you had, every bar bottle was returnable.
Deposit, yeah, sure.
So they came in reusable cases.
And they would hand them back, yeah.
We got all the bottles back. We had sanitized cleaners, caustic, and cleaned them, washers soakers to get off the labels. And then we'd fill them. In fact, one of the things we did when Mick Dry came up, which Mick Dry was huge, came out and just went like that. And so we did match special dry, and we bought Michelob Dry bottles off the market
with the special neck. Yeah.
And put match special dry in them. And then I got a letter from Budweiser's attorneys saying, you can't do that. We were buying them on a secondary market, so you can do whatever you want. But, you don't want to get Bud all pissed off at you at the time.
No, you don't.
The funny part of that story was I was in St. Louis. My wife's from St. Louis. And I was outside with my first son. And we were kind of walking around. The neighbor came up. He had a little dog, and so he was petting my dog. And the guy looks at me, he goes, "So where are you from?" And I said, Utica, New York. And he goes, "Home of FX Matt Brewing Company." And I look at him and I go, "How do you know that?" And he goes, "I'm the chief legal counsel for Anheuser-Busch. I live right next to your in-laws." So I said to him, "Well, I got kind of a nasty letter from you guys." And he said, "Just send it to me. If we'd really like you to not use that bottle." And I said, "We'll switch bottles. It's not worth it." He said, how about you do it in the next 3 months? And then we moved on.
That's too funny, man.
Yeah, it was really cool.
I had no idea that type of skullduggery is not the right word, but there's a certain level of tradecraft there that you guys are getting up to. I did not know that was part of the game back then.
Yeah. It was the little guys that were buying bottles.
Of course, yeah.
A new bottle in those days might have been, $1.50, and you bought the used bottles for, anywhere from 30 to 50 cents a case.
Yeah.
And washing might cost you 70 cents, so you're getting them at half cost.
Yeah. God, that's so... No one did that with beer balls, though. You couldn't do that with beer balls. Because they were always plastic, right, Fred? They were never...
Yeah.
No, you never made them out of glass. That wouldn't work. They'd crack or whatever.
No.
Yeah, gotcha. So, beer balls come to an end at FX Matt in what? Like, we put it at the early 90s or so, Fred?
Yeah, I'd say kind of 91.
Yeah. And at what point does Saranac hit the scene for you guys?
Saranac hit the scene in 1986.
Okay, so it's really coming on. Didn't
do a lot until we won the Great American Beer Fest in 92. And then we just leaned in and did voted best. And the real thing that changed Saranac was we did a black and tan that did just went bonkers the second we did it. And then right behind that, we did trail mix.
That variety
Trail
pack
mix.
that you were describing earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Saranac trail mix variety pack was just explosive.
Yeah.
I mean, that thing was unbelievable.
Wow. There's a little bit of symmetry there, though, right? Like as beer balls, sort of have their heyday, is a time when everyone else is doing light beer. And so you guys find sort of a niche there. And then as beer balls sort of taper off for FX Matt, well, guess what's coming on strong now is this Saranac, line that you guys developed in-house and are marketing, and the first sort of, big boom of the craft, as we mentioned, the first boom of the craft beer industry. So, what I love about the trail mix detail in particular is that's another packaging innovation.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you go from one right to the other.
Yeah, I'd say that, we did a product called Maximus Super, which was the first double strength beer out there. We did trail mix. We were the first American company to have a hard lemonade out in the United States. We worked with Blue Moon. We worked with Spiked Seltzer.
Yeah.
I think we as a company have reinvented ourselves more times over 135 years just because we have to.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
if you keep evolving and you keep reinventing yourself, but keep delighting your customer, they keep coming back. And, for the most part, obviously in the 80s, we weren't doing a very good job of delighting our customer, and our business went like that. But, really for most of our 136 years, we have delighted customers to the point that thankfully they keep coming back and keep buying our products.
Yeah, yeah. And you got the contract brewing piece of the puzzle there, which, as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, is about 50% of the volume that you guys are doing, which is a good place to be at a time like, at this moment in the market, right? There's always someone who needs tank space, even if it's not your brand. So if you can run something else through there, that still works, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Fred, reflecting on the beer ball sort of era, right? The mid 70s all the way up through the late 80s and to its conclusion in the early 90s. I'm curious, like, you obviously look back on it with fondness and obviously people love it. You've made a very good case for why it can't come back. The dollars and cents of it, don't really pencil out, as the accountants say. Do us a favor, indulge us a little bit here on Taplines. Take the other side of that argument. How would you bring it back if you had to? If we said, all right, FX Mac got to, everyone wants it, everyone's clamoring for it. How do we make this thing work?
I'd probably do half the size.
Okay.
Because I think if you did it as a case, and then did the tap, did a mini beer ball the way we did it, I think you could do it. I think
miniaturize
there, it, so
man.
to speak. Yeah.
Oh man, it floats also. So you got pool party vibe. I think, mini kegs, I feel like, the kind of gimmicky keg that Heineken did and Newcastle did, those never really gained traction, but people love especially beer drinkers, American beer drinkers love a gimmick, as you know, and especially one that functions. I like the idea of cutting it in half, reducing the volume by 50% and then taking this thing out to market. Obviously, just a thought experiment. You made a very strong case for why it's probably not the right move, but man, if you ever do it, I would love to see one. And you got at least one sale, Fred.
I'll look in to see if we can do half a ball.
Yeah, there we go, man. Fred, Matt, last sort of by way of wrapping up here, you mentioned the reinvention that FX Mac has to do again and again throughout its history. What's the latest reinvention? I mean, listeners who are more tuned into the trade know that FX Mac is making big moves fairly recently with some tie-ups and with some new products. What's the, if not beer balls, what else is going on at FX Mac?
Well, I think a couple things. We are very bullish on beer going forward, and so that we just did a deal with Flying Dog, which is a big brand in Maryland, and I think there's other opportunities in the beer space to add to the beers we make and keep them in our footprint, so we become bigger within our footprint. I think that's one thing. I think just the the innovation that we're working on. I think there's a lot of space to play in non-alcoholic products. That there's a whole wide place there. We're into THC and CBD with Brooklyn and New York Hemp Farm. We're doing this JV with Friday Beers.
That's right.
I think the whole JV space for us is a really interesting one because I think we can partner with other brands, other companies, and do things together. Our Right Coast Spirits is a partnership with Harpoon and was Flying Dog, but now we own Flying Dog, so it's just us and Harpoon. And I think there's ways that the guys like us can do products across the country, like a Right Coast Spirits or something, and you have partners in the Midwest and the Rockies and California, and just go right across the country with a product that everybody's marketing the same product, but we're doing it in our territory. And it's, a JV that we all own part of, and there's some tie that we all have together. That's a space I'm really interested in, and I think's a real upside opportunity for us. I
like that. We go from packaging innovation to start the conversation to business structure innovation to close the conversation. I think that's a good place to leave it, Fred. You talked about delighting your customers. You have certainly delighted this host of this podcast, and I'm sure you've delighted our listeners too. Thanks again for coming on Taplines. It was
thank you. And anytime. I love these things.
Right on. Well, careful what you promise, man. We're going to twist your arm to get you back on sooner rather than later.
As I always say, I never offer what I'm not willing to give because I have this fear of someone saying, yeah, let's do it. So when I say to people, call me if you come to town, I'll have a beer. I mean it.
Very good. I hope someday Taplines can do a live episode in Utica at the FX.
That would be great.
At the FX Matt Brewery. But until such time, visions of beer balls will dance in our heads. Fred, Matt, thank you so much for joining Taplines, and we'll see you again soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Dave.
All right. Taplines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mallon, editor-in-chief Joanna Sciarrino, managing editor Tim McCurdy, and art director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Taplines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes, you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.